The purpose of this presentation is to introduce inclusive ideas and perspectives to educators that may find themselves employed within a remote or rural location with a high Indigenous community cohort. It is our aim to deliver a cultural and pedagogical understanding to build a toolbox of concepts that can be used in both the classroom and the wider community. We believe that in having an understanding of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander history and culture, it will unlock the door to delivering a more comprehensive pedagogical approach in the classroom. Acknowledging the culture and history of the community and incorporating it into the curriculum will help slowly rewrite the master narrative, allow discussion about the silences, and work towards creating a more honest and inclusive national identity. During our research, we have uncovered stark differences in the community and believe that there is a common denominator for the success in an Indigenous community when it comes to education, wellbeing and inclusivity.
When I first started, I didn't have any idea what to expect, and I went to a large community out in the middle of nowhere, and when I got out there, everyone is extremely accepting and would wave to me and say good day.
When you first arrive, it is quite confronting because the communities don't look like places where we would live in towns. I think probably my first impression was one of shock and disbelief that people living in Australia lived in conditions like they do out here. And I remember expressing that kind of shock to my principal at the time, and he just said, yeah, I remember feeling like that too, but just give it some time. That was good advice because as time goes on and you get to know the people, then you stop seeing the rubbish and you stop seeing the dogs and you stop seeing the poverty, and you just see the people because they're people who are important to you. You become part of their lives and you don't pass judgments anymore about the way that they're living their lives. You know them personally, so it becomes a different experience after that. But you need to allow yourself time to experience that initial shock and hopefully not be put off by it.
When I first entered my first remote community, it was a shock in terms of what on the surface appears to be the living standards of people and how people were to live. You become more understanding and more knowledgeable and appreciative of the differences and also of the difficulties people face.
We came out and just arrived in Alice Springs the next day. We drove out to Papunya and wow, it was a very steep learning curve. The kids speak another language other than English, and I had no ESL training. I'm a high school drama and English teacher, and I went into an upper primary class who spoke literature. So I was, what do I do? So that part of it was quite daunting. You would try and explain things, and eventually you would learn a better way of explaining because it wasn't that the kids weren't up to their task. A lot of the times they couldn't understand what the task was, so that was quite tricky.
Megan and I started this journey by researching some known facts on Indigenous students in regard to education. Many non-Indigenous teachers in Australia simply do not know enough about how to teach Indigenous children. The strategies that have been successful for non-Indigenous students are often ineffective for Indigenous students, who are the most educationally disadvantaged group in the nation. The educational outcomes are generally well below those of non-Indigenous students, and their school participation rates are lower than those of their non-Indigenous peers. They leave school earlier and are less likely to complete secondary schooling. They are also underrepresented in universities, comprising in 2008 of less than 1% of all enrolments at Australian higher education institutions. A recent report on Closing the Gap indicated that Australian universities have reported that there has been a strong growth in Indigenous enrolments in recent years, 70% more Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island university students than in 2008. It is also more likely that more Indigenous students than non-Indigenous students to be inappropriately placed in special education classes because their needs are misdiagnosed. In 2004, the proportion of Aboriginal students placed in specialist classes was greater than the proportion of Aboriginal students in the student population of the whole of New South Wales. In 2011, this figure has improved slightly. Factors which are a barrier to Aboriginal students' education are: many Aboriginal students' first language is not English; overcrowded housing where Aboriginal students cannot learn or do homework. Even the brightest of students in these communities will struggle if they have to compete with members of 3 or more families permanently occupying the same dwelling. Poverty. Because parents can't afford health services, students have poorer health than their peers. Hearing loss is one consequence, with all of its side effects which affect learning. Connection to their communities. Many Aboriginal people like to reside in their own communities and will not leave them for skills training. Uneducated parents. Native welfare took Aboriginal children away up until the late 1970s. Aboriginal parents where one parent was white were in constant fear that if they sent their children to school, they would never see them again. Bad memories of school. Many families had bad memories of their time at school, where they didn't learn about their own culture and were not allowed to speak their language. Resentment from white governments and individuals has also been passed down through generations. Poor teaching quality. More than 25% of surveyed Australian teachers feel the need for more professional development for Aboriginal education. Disengaged teachers. A good teacher is one who relates to the community and stays long enough to build up the rapport and trust to encourage kids to stay at school. Lack of full-time teachers. In some communities, students are keen and eager to learn, but cannot progress because there are no full-time teachers skilled in teaching English or basic mathematics. Remote regions of Australia suffer from massive teacher shortages, which are expected to worsen as the older teachers retire. Fetal alcohol disorder. Although there is no national data on the prevalence of FASD in Australia, it is known to occur in both the Indigenous and non-Indigenous populations. Many of these barriers have been shared with us via interviews with teachers living and educating in rural schools in remote areas.
Jidi Aboriginal schools spoke to the community to ask what they wanted in the learning of their children. This included elders, parents and the wider community. They involved adding services to the school like adult literacy and numeracy, careers advice and social workers. They extended the services to extend relationships within their community where everybody felt comfortable. They looked at the community as an extended family and found that it created a more extended family environment. There is a link on our further reading page about the Jidi Aboriginal school that's worth watching. The 8 Aboriginal Ways of Learning pedagogical framework has the ability to cross cultures, is all-encompassing of all learners, and will open a doorway to history in a holistic and inclusive manner. It supports not only the Indigenous student, but offers a culturally rich sharing of backgrounds, stories, and authentic learning. It is a flexible, comprehensive, and encourages community participation, which can be applied within the Australian curriculum and acknowledges professional standards for teachers, paying particular reference to 1.4 and 2.4. This framework directly aligns with the applied learning principles and promotes hands-on learning, which is applied generously within alternative school settings and also being positively adopted within the mainstream education system with wider support in areas such as Victorian Certificate of Applied Learning. Story sharing is a method used within the Indigenous culture where transmission of knowledge comes through the sharing of stories. These stories can be enriched with histories, spirituality, or the teaching of basic skills. Communicating stories and experiences can increase connectedness and assist in the transferring of knowledge by forming relationships and trust within the learning environment. Learning maps allow the students to be encouraged to visualise their learning goals through the use of images and visuals. This gives the students a path to follow and the knowledge of who is there to help them. When a student knows what the learning path looks like, they are more confident to progress through its stages. Non-verbal and symbols and images are a natural and ancient method of communication in the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. These 2 learning tools involve the use of pictures, art, dance and a kinesthetic learning. This is an inclusive practice which has been found to significantly help students with auditory issues or processing disorders, where learning is visually supported to obtain understanding. Land links involves connecting students to the land around them, the surrounding areas and the communities in which they live. This can include subjects such as history, sustainability, climate and Indigenous flora and fauna of the area. Non-linear encourages critical and creative thinking. This pedagogy allows teachers to create learning in a more innovative way, using present knowledge together with new experiences to create new learning. Community links acknowledge who can share and support the students' learning. The emphasis is not only on the teacher, but the wider community. Classrooms and educational environments can include important guests to share knowledge, including elders or other community members. This is not only enriching for the students, but also a support to the teacher. Deconstructing and reconstructing allows students to work holistically with their previous knowledge and create links to new learning by pulling apart information and redesigning it in a way that is relevant to them.
Harris defined two-way Aboriginal schooling as a strategy to help make the matter of choice real in both worlds, to provide opportunity for the primary Aboriginal identity to stay strong through changing and thus continue to be the source of inner strength and security necessary for dealing with the Western world. To begin to cross boundaries in education, we are required to be inclusive in our classrooms. Respect of all cultures, accepting differences as opportunities to build perspective, ideas and opinions in the sharing of stories, knowledge and experiences. The Two Ways model is a clear framework that encompasses both Aboriginal and European knowledge, culture and experiences. The goal is to holistically share journeys to develop a new knowledge and understanding so that an inclusive pedagogy can be constructed to form tools, tasks and assessments that can be delivered as a combined teaching framework. The Two Ways model has the capacity to dissolve a divided classroom and allow students to learn from each other's cultures. One way to achieve this would be to incorporate extended family and community into the classrooms to strengthen the sharing of cultures, identities and perspectives. We have provided a link in further information that shows a school in northern New South Wales who has had success in using this model in the classroom by inviting elders to support delivery of pedagogy in the classroom by sharing Aboriginal culture inclusively with a mixed cohort of students. The school has achieved a higher success rate in assessment, attendance and engagement across all cultures. During the following interviews, you will learn that the inclusion of community members in Aboriginal districts can make the difference to a successful engagement of all students. The Ganma metaphor likens the meeting of these knowledge systems to the meeting of two bodies of water in a lagoon where salt and fresh water come together. The idea of teaching Indigenous culture and language alongside Western disciplines was originally promoted during the 1980s through the intervention of Indigenous groups in schools. Harris argued that these domains cannot exist entirely separately and that it is healthy for aspects of each domain to contribute to the other,